On November 5, 1872, Susan B. Anthony, a leading figure in the women's suffrage movement, boldly cast her vote in the presidential election in Rochester, New York. Her act of defiance was illegal at the time, as women were not granted the right to vote. Anthony's decision to vote challenged the legal system and became a pivotal moment in the fight for women's suffrage in the United States. This narrative explores the events leading up to Anthony's illegal vote, the trial that followed, and the enduring impact of her actions on the suffrage movement.
Susan B. Anthony was born on February 15, 1820, in Adams, Massachusetts, into a Quaker family with a strong commitment to social justice. From an early age, Anthony was exposed to the ideals of equality and was encouraged to fight for her beliefs. She became an active abolitionist and later focused on women's rights, co-founding the National Woman Suffrage Association, NWSA, with Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1869. Anthony was a tireless advocate for women's suffrage, traveling the country to give speeches, organize rallies, and lobby politicians. She believed that the right to vote was fundamental to women's equality and was determined to challenge the laws that denied women this right.
In the years leading up to the 1872 election, the women's suffrage movement gained momentum, but progress was slow and met with strong resistance. The 14th and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution had granted citizenship and voting rights to African American men, but women were still excluded from the franchise. Anthony and her fellow suffragists argued that the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause should extend voting rights to women as well. With this legal interpretation in mind, Anthony decided to test the law by attempting to vote in the upcoming presidential election. On November 1, 1872, she and a group of 14 other women from Rochester went to the local voter registration office. Despite initial reluctance from the registrars, Anthony's forceful argument persuaded them to allow the women to register.
On November 5, 1872, Susan B. Anthony and the other women went to the polls and cast their ballots. Anthony voted for Ulysses S. Grant, the Republican candidate who was running for re-election. Her act of voting was a calculated risk, as she fully expected to be arrested for violating the law. 2 weeks later, on November 18th, a U.S. deputy marshal arrived at Anthony's home and arrested her. Anthony was charged with illegally voting and was held for trial in federal court. Her arrest and the subsequent trial attracted widespread attention, becoming a rallying point for the suffrage movement. Anthony used the trial as a platform to advocate for women's rights, arguing that she had a constitutional right to vote as a citizen of the United States. However, the judge, Ward Hunt, was unsympathetic. In a controversial move, he directed the jury to deliver a guilty verdict without deliberation. Anthony was fined $100, which she refused to pay, declaring that she would never submit to an unjust penalty.
Although Anthony never paid the fine, the trial was a turning point in the suffrage movement. Her defiance brought national attention to the cause and galvanized support for women's right to vote. The trial highlighted the contradictions in a legal system that denied women the rights of citizenship while holding them accountable to the same laws as men. Anthony continued to fight for women's suffrage for the rest of her life, organizing, writing, and speaking out until her death in 1906. Although she did not live to see the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which granted women the right to vote, her efforts were instrumental in achieving this victory. The amendment is often referred to as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment in recognition of her tireless work. Anthony's act of voting illegally and her subsequent trial remain powerful symbols of the struggle for women's rights. Her willingness to challenge the law and stand up for her beliefs inspired generations of women to fight for their rights and laid the groundwork for the eventual success of the suffrage movement.
Susan B. Anthony's decision to vote illegally in 1872 was a bold and defiant act that challenged the status quo and advanced the cause of women's suffrage. Her actions and the trial that followed highlighted the injustices faced by women and brought greater attention to the need for change. As we reflect on Anthony's legacy, we honor her courage and determination, which played a crucial role in securing the right to vote for women and advancing the broader fight for gender equality.